recent events in the two Virginias.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm your host, Melinda Zosh. COVID-19 has impacted many aspects of our lives. Just last March, businesses, restaurants, and even churches shut down. Now, as vaccines go into more arms in the two Virginias, things are starting to reopen, and we are starting to have hope that life could return to a new normal. However, COVID has still changed us in many ways, and it's also changed church services. That's the topic we're focusing on in this edition of In Focus. We're going to talk to 6 area pastors and church representatives. In this segment, we're going to talk to 3 pastors, Pastor Damon Hamby with Mount Vernon Church located in Lanark, West Virginia, Bishop Frederick Brown with the Faith Center in Bluefield, West Virginia, and also Pastor Barry Absher with City on a Hill located in Tazewell, Virginia. So I want to thank all of our guests for joining us. We're going to jump right in. Pastor Hamby, I'll start with you. Tell us a bit about the challenges you faced as a pastor in the past year and also how COVID has impacted the way you preach.
Every leader in every industry has had to wade through uncharted waters. None of us have pioneered through a pandemic before. As far as the specific challenge of adjusting my preaching, the main takeaway I have is that I've had to learn to be even more pithy and precise and poignant. Since the pandemic struck, we've utilized a combination of outdoor services and online services. And one of the dynamic differences between being inside a building versus being outside, when you're indoors, the sound from the speakers reverberates off the walls and your people can hear you much more loudly and clearly. When you're outside speaking through a sound system, the sound echoes without that reverberation, which means that it takes an extra second or two for people to hear you when you speak. What that means is that I've had to learn to speak a little more slowly, project my voice a little more loudly, which ultimately means that whereas in 30 minutes I used to say more, now I have to say less, which forces me to be more concise in my delivery. And in a related sense, that's true with online services. When you produce an online video, you've got 10 seconds to convince that listener to stay tuned in. And that reduces the possibility of having protracted introductions. You have to make your point and make it fast. So if nothing else, I've been forced in a good way to be more pithy and to focus on the heart of the message more clearly.
All right, Pastor Hamby, that's some interesting insight about how you've had to adjust the way you speak as well. And I want to turn things over now to Bishop Brown. And Bishop Brown, you've been preaching at the Faith Center for more than a quarter century. So how has COVID impacted the way you do things there?
Well, Mel, first of all, I love your wording when you say things like a quarter of a century. It sounds like you're trying to make me sound old, but I'll just keep it moving from there. But it's been challenging in some aspects, just trying to keep our hands upon all of the partners and members of our local assembly. So we've had to become very creative in our approach to ministry, and very different than what we were accustomed to, or maybe I should even say what had become our norm for these last 27 years at the Faith Center Church. And so, there were challenges trying to make sure that we were able to keep our hands on everyone. So one of the things that we established was what we called a We Care program. And a We Care program was a team of leaders from our local church that always made contact with the rest of the members of our church. We have, a fairly large congregation for our area. And so we had to have a team that was able to kind of keep their hands upon all of the partners and members. And we offered them transportation to hospitals, pharmacies. We offered them opportunities to go out and get groceries for them or whatever the need was, not just for our local church, but we did it for the entire community. And that was very effective. We had several people, throughout the community that we were able to help. And then, of course, as my brother has said, we also did the whole outdoor. We did a few outdoor services, but most of our services were live here on Facebook. And actually, it became something that was very effective because we were able to not just be localized to our physical location there in the city of Bluefield, but we were literally able to reach out and touch the nations of the world with the gospel.
All right, and Bishop Brown, I'm just showing you how much experience you have, not how old you are. See, I'm just showing how experienced you are. All right, Let's turn things over now to Pastor Absher. Pastor Absher, what would you like to add on how COVID has impacted the way you preach and your messages that you're delivering every Sunday?
I think passion and compassion would be the two main things. Many people, we know how terrible this pandemic has been physically and for the health of people. But one of the issues that I feel like has been underaddressed many times has been the mental effects it has had on our society and our congregation members. Many young people in my congregation were struggling mentally with this isolation. So I think it made me specify my preaching to try to target that group and let them know there is hope and to try to find ways to connect people to each other, even in the midst of a pandemic, because isolation is tough on any individual to feel like you're standing alone. And there's so many people during this pandemic that, yes, the physical ramifications, I felt it personally and throughout my family, but the emotional damage that we've seen it do, it caused me to step outside of the box in my preaching and try to zero in on that and find ways as a pastor to connect people, of course, to God and also to each other and let them know you are not alone.
All right, and that's an excellent point, Pastor Absher, that you're not alone, and I know a lot of people did feel that way during this pandemic. We do have to take a quick break, much more to talk about. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Good morning once again, everyone. Welcome back to this edition of In Focus. COVID-19 has changed our lives in so many different ways. We could spend an entire segment or two talking just about that. But this morning, we're talking about how it's changed church services. So I'd like to bring back in Pastor Hamby. And Pastor Hamby, what's the biggest learning lesson you and your congregation have taken away from this pandemic?
The central wisdom that we've garnered in this past year is that the church is truly a body and not a building. When we exercised our outdoor services, we would find so many people in the neighborhood of our church would actually come outside and sit on their porches Sunday morning and enjoy the services with us. And these are individuals who would not otherwise have come inside the building. It's also opened up other evangelical avenues as far as us getting outside of the building and reaching people in more creative ways. I've been reminded that Jesus was never confined to a specific facility. And the early church for the first few centuries, they met in houses, they met underground, they met outdoors. They were not dependent upon buildings as we've become today. And even now in so many ministries and churches, it seems like the emphasis is on building bigger, getting a facility, getting an arena or a stadium. And while that is useful, we have to exercise every avenue possible to get the gospel out to as many people as we can. And we can't be confined or limited by physical space. And it's also reminded us, as Pastor Absher noted, that the depression and the anxiety that people have suffered this past year has been maddening. And it's reawakened a need and an appreciation for fellowship. So I see that on the horizon as something that will give us momentum. And I just hope we as leaders and saints capitalize on that and not let it get lost once things get back to, quote, whatever normal is.
Right, that's a good point, Pastor Hamby. And I know technology has helped a lot of pastors and preachers reach even more people with Facebook Live. And Bishop Brown, I'd like to bring you back in. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned over this past year during the pandemic?
A couple of things. Pastor Hamby made a very important point when he was talking about the well-being of the people. Sometimes we were so aggressive trying to protect people physically that we forgot about the mental challenge and the mental strain of people just trying to cope with everything that was happening and going on. And so that's why we believed the church was essential. And we were doing everything we could possibly do to get our doors back open. There are 9 really quick little points. I'll say it in 30 seconds. There are 9 points that I've emphasized to our church coming out of the pandemic. And number 1 is to never take your health for granted, because we realize through this pandemic, it can all change in just one moment. Don't ever take life for granted, because, it's important for us to learn how to live life to its fullest every day. Sometimes things put pressure on our theology. And even with me, our theology of faith, but nevertheless, we realized that it was faith that actually pulled us through this whole pandemic. One of the bigger lessons also is that faith and science are not enemies, but the two can be merged together and we can learn from both. And we've learned some valuable lessons that none of us are superheroes, that we are all just servants of the Lord. And moving forward, it's times that we may need to shut down. Maybe we needed to shut down so that we could be refreshed and be restored, and to be reminded ministry outside of the four walls is possible, but now it has caused me to value the four walls that much more. And it's important for us to plant seed and to sow seed, because just as we have experienced here, a time of famine has come. And nevertheless, most of my people have prospered and have advanced through this whole thing. And now my eyes and my heart and my understanding and my commitment to life and my family and to ministry just takes on a whole different perspective. And, we're going to do some things differently with more great intention.
All right, excellent points there, Bishop, especially about not taking really anything for granted. And Pastor Absher, I'd like to bring you back in. So what have you and your congregation, your members, taken away during this time since the pandemic started really last year?
I love what Bishop brought up, and out of great opposition, there comes great opportunity. That is one of the things we have learned. We have seen an increase in our church, our online family, and the people we're connected to. Before the pandemic, I think we had 1,900 Facebook followers. Now, in the throes of this pandemic, we have over 5,000 Facebook followers. It caused our reach to, like Bishop was talking, to stretch out there. So out of this opposition in society, we were able to see a great opportunity and, just spread that message of hope and love. And it's just been even though it's been a very trying time, it's been a blessed time also. We've seen some great things happen, great people brought to church, and just met some great people through this. And one of the things we'll never take for granted again is sitting in the congregation, holding our neighbor's hand, praising, laughing, and just having fellowship. When that comes back full force, I think we're going to appreciate it more than we ever did before.
All right, gentlemen, we have just a few minutes left in this segment, but quickly from each of you, 30 seconds, your thoughts on what the general public and our community can take away during this one-year trial of dealing with a pandemic. Pastor Hamby?
If I can, I just want to take this quick moment to say we are building a gymnasium/community center for the young people in the area of Beckley, West Virginia. Please find out about it. Help us out if you can. Go to Mount Vernon Lanark page. It's called God's Freeman Center. We're trying to get these kids off the streets and into a productive environment.
Hey, that's an excellent thing. Maybe we could do a story on that. I love that. Good plug there. Bishop Brown, anything that you'd like to add? Any concluding thoughts for the general public?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say that this pandemic has taught us how great of a need there is to have the Lord and to have God and to be involved in church and in ministry. One of the things I'm always stressing to everyone is everyone needs a church home. You need a family. You need a sphere, a nucleus, a group of people that you can connect with like and precious faith, so that your life can advance and grow and prosper, not only just making your way to heaven, but even while you're here in the earth. And I want to say to everyone, it is time for us to get back to church, and not only get back to church, but get back to being the church. And I believe we're well on our way.
All right. Thank you, Bishop Brown. And Pastor Absher, any concluding thoughts from you?
Yes, in the words of my wise 87-year-old grandmother, I think it's time for us to stress this too shall pass. So many times when we're going through a season, it seems like it's always going to be that way, but this too shall pass. Better days are on the way.
All right, that's excellent advice. This too shall pass. Thank you, gentlemen. Stay with us. We have another quick break, more guests just ahead. We'll be right back after this. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to this edition of In Focus. This morning, we've been talking about how COVID has impacted church services in our area. I'd like to welcome our 3 new guests this segment: Reverend Gary Moore with Scott Street Baptist Church in Bluefield, West Virginia, Pastor Jim Drake with Parkview Baptist Church in Bluefield, Virginia, and also Karen Stanley will be joining us as well. She represents First Baptist Church in Bluefield, West Virginia. So Reverend Moore, I'll start with you. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced as a preacher this past year? Walk us through what it's been like for you and also your congregation.
Well, our last official service was on March the 15th of 2020, and we wanted to make sure that the church was safe for everybody, and so we made some adjustments as far as the worship experience is concerned. We didn't have music, so we didn't. We had shields instead of masks for the singers, so we made that adjustment, and also we made sure that everybody had a mask when they came in. We actually marked the seating with green and yellow tape for individuals and families. We have 2 sanitation stations. We have a thermometer. The ushers will come around and take your temperature before you are seated. And we also became very adept at digital programming and social media with Facebook Live. And we did a lot of things to make sure that people felt that they were actually safe when they came to church. Not one person did we lose due to COVID. We didn't do one funeral because of COVID all year, thank God. And we had some people who actually contracted the virus out of town, and as far as in cities are concerned, but even they recovered. And so we're very fortunate and grateful for that.
And that's wonderful that no one passed away. Thank you for that insight, Reverend Moore. And Pastor Drake, I'd like to bring you in. Tell us about some of the biggest challenges that you've faced over the past year and also your congregation.
Well, I've really got to start off just by saying how thankful I am and how really appreciative I am of the way that our folks handled all of this. There's been so much with the political turmoil and with the confusion or even dissension over wearing the masks and all of those kind of things. And I'm just so thankful at how well our folks responded. We've got folks on all end of the political spectrum and folks with all the different opinions that you would have, but they have been united through the whole thing. And I'm just so thankful that that's been the case. But as far as the biggest challenge, is the fact that our church has really become used to being ingrained in our community and being involved in the community and having community cookouts and tutoring students and being involved in the town Christmas tree lighting and just all the different aspects outside of our walls. And that's been so limited this year that's probably been the hardest part. It's good as we see things somewhat returning to normal, and some of the folks that have been uncomfortable with coming out once they've gotten their vaccines and things, being able to come back to in-person worship and being back with the family. So it's nice to be coming out of this, and we look forward to being able to be back more involved in our community as this thing gets in our rearview mirror.
Yeah, definitely, Pastor Drake. I think we're all looking forward to getting back to a normal sense of life. I'd like to bring in Karen now. Karen, tell us more about how your church has had to adapt over this past year.
We actually had our last service about last March, and within about 2 weeks, we started doing online sermons that was posted on our Facebook page, but also on the church website. And then we still continue to do that to this day. Then in June, we started meeting outside. We have a very nice lawn out on the side of the church. So wearing masks, we all brought lawn chairs, and we would sit outside and have our church service and our special music till fall. In the fall, we moved into the church, and the pews were roped off. Every other pew was roped off. Everything was cleaned after every single service. We did start out with 2 services, but then very quickly we just took it down to 1 service. They will allow one family on a pew, 2 to 3 people on another pew, but you have to stay socially distanced. And of course, we have masks. There are masks available when you come through the door if you need one. There's also hand sanitizers. We adapted to that. Our concern was not just for the immediate church family that was there, but also for our seniors, because any church you go to, the seniors will be there. When the doors open, they're the first ones there, they're the last ones to leave. That is their community. And so the big concern was for the seniors, how to keep them safe, how to still make them feel a part of the church, but yet not bring them in to where they could get sick, they could get COVID, and none of us wanted that. We did not have any Sunday schools going at this time. We had no adult choir, youth choir, children's choir. But that is not to say that we still aren't doing things behind the scenes. Our children's group started a couple of months ago where once a month they take a theme and they make activity packets and they'll take to the children there in the church. So they have a little project to do. It keeps them involved. We also have a couple of ministries. We have an all senior, and we also have a women's ministry. They still meet once a month. We're still able to do a few little mission projects, but not on the scale that we had done in the past. In the past, our women's mission group, we did a lasagna dinner every year in the spring, and proceeds from that went to a designated mission project we had decided before, whether it's to sponsor someone on a mission trip overseas or whether it's something locally. We had actually decided before COVID hit that we were going to do our lasagna dinner that April, and the proceeds would go to Richlands, to a Baptist organization there that was working with flood victims in Richlands. And unfortunately, COVID happened, so we didn't get to do that. That is one thing, being a church in BLUEFIELD, that we've really missed the mission things that we've done out in the community, working with the mission, Wade Center, Bland County Clinic.
Yeah, there's been a lot of challenges I think we've all had to face. Thank you for sharing that, Karen. And Reverend Moore, what's the biggest learning lesson that you've taken away from this pandemic, and what do you hope members of the church, your church, and the community take away from all of this?
Well, the wonderful thing about all of this is realizing how well we are all connected together. Whether it doesn't make any difference what our names are on the outside of our worship house. We are all connected in some way because of faith itself. And politically, we've tried to solve a lot of spiritual problems by political means, and that is not, as we feel, God's way of doing things. But I don't have a right to make you sick. I don't have a right to make you feel like I make you sick. So I'm just, I wanted to take those precautions that would get handed down from the CDC and from the World Health Organization too, for that matter, and from our governor. We did want to follow the guidelines that they provided for us, just so we would be on the safe side, not for insurance purposes, not for any other reason other than I wanted people to feel safe when they came to our church. It's one thing, the Bible actually tells us not to tempt the Lord thy God. I mean, it's one thing to know that something like that is out there, but to just blatantly go out and be careless was something that, none of us wanted to do anyway. So we just kept praying and hoped that people would actually follow the guidelines that we even had at the church, so that people could come in and worship and not worry about what they had other than the Lord himself when they finished. They finished worship.
Yeah, and I know that I think all learned something about the pandemic is to be kind to one another. That's something I've taken away from this, is just be nice. And Pastor Drake, what's the biggest learning lesson that you've taken away from all of this?
Well, I think first I learned that I'm not an epidemiologist. So, there have been so many people that have come out and purported to be, social media experts or whatever, and just realizing that, that's not necessarily our realm to have to understand every little thing about viruses or vaccines or any of that kind of stuff, but just to stay in our lane and to focus where the Lord has us to be. I've also had to learn, on the practical side, I've had to learn how to be more effective with technology, how to be more flexible with how you set up your services, be able to turn on a dime with plans, and learn how to hold all of our plans and designs loosely. But I guess the biggest lessons through all of this have been just trusting the Lord, and seeing that He has been faithful through all of this. There's been some significant tragedy in people's lives. There's been significant disruption in people's lives, whether it's with their livelihood, with the economic situation, or whether it's people actually losing their lives or people getting sick. And just the reassurance that no matter what happens, that God is always faithful and that He's always in control.
All right, thank you. I want to thank all of our guests. We have run out of time in this segment, but we've learned a lot about how COVID-19 has really impacted our lives, especially those who run church services. So again, I want to thank all of our guests for joining us this morning. That does it for this edition of In Focus. I hope you all have a terrific day. We'll see you again right here next Sunday.